After a lengthy stay at Keystone Park, Anita, our female giant anteater, is finally medically cleared to return to her home at Keystone Wilds. During her stay at Keystone Park, she was fully evaluated for any and all pregnancy complications, and thankfully, everything's now looking good. We can soon expect the baby to be born in the coming months, and have redesigned and reevaluated a few specific sections of the giant anteater enclosure at Keystone Wilds in preparation. Despite being outwardly based with fun and entertainment in mind, conservation truly is at the heart of the Keystone name. To be able to help a species that truly needs it is a special privilege, and one that none of our staff takes lightly. Speaking of species that need our help, in case you missed the last episode, we introduced our first reptile into Keystone Wilds, and a big one at that. Meet Charlie, the Komodo dragon. Charlie has adjusted into his new home very quickly, but certainly prefers to spend his day basking in the sun outside. His habitat has free choice built into it, meaning he can go inside or outside as he pleases, and guests will have an amazing view either way. This in its own right is actually a form of animal enrichment used at zoos all around the world, and can really help give a species a nice change of scenery at will. While inside, Charlie can choose to enjoy his favorite treats, a frozen blood pumpkin, and we're going through the supply very quickly. The interior portion of the habitat also has a webcam streaming live to guests at home right now, as do a majority of the habitats at Keystone Wilds. Just because our zoo isn't officially open to the public quite yet, doesn't mean that the guest can't get attached to our new friends. To further aid in guest engagement as the zoo prepares to open, we've also released a new collectible item into the Keystone Wilds online gift shop available to purchase before the zoo officially opens. Upon each successful animal added to the zoo, we'll be releasing a custom-made sticker unique for each species, meaning so far we've collected stickers for the giant anteater, largibbon, Herman's tortoise, little penguin, and our newest addition to the collection, the Komodo dragon. You too can purchase these stickers yourself using the channel store. The link is in the description below. They're a lot of fun to collect. We'll be releasing a new sticker to accompany the Animal of the Week every single episode, featuring the new addition to the zoo's roster, and are currently working through Keystone Park's roster as well. With all of these recent additions to the Keystone family, our head keeper has started to get a bit overwhelmed and overworked. Knowing our financial situation, he was hesitant at first to ask for help, as another keeper on payroll is something that Keystone Wilds is going to struggle to afford. However, with the recent launch of the sticker collection through the gift shop, we can now afford some solid help. Conveniently enough, our new hire is a reptile expert, having owned pets from snakes to lizards throughout her entire life. I say conveniently because only after her being hired did we learn that our head keeper is deathly afraid of anything with scales. Now that I think about it, he never did step foot in the Keystone Park reptile house. Our new keeper, just like Charlie, has adjusted well into Keystone Wilds and was welcomed with open arms by the rest of the team. Continuing on with the theme of conservation, one of the most important aspects of the Keystone brand are our various breeding programs across both zoos. One of the more successful programs is located at Keystone Park and focuses on the release of giant otter families back into their home in the Amazon River. The giant otter habitat at Keystone Park features a large underwater viewing port and is among one of the most popular exhibits in the entire zoo. Knowing this, when we got the news that 3 young Asian small-clawed otters were in the Keystone veterinary system, we figured that Keystone Wilds would be a perfect home for the trio. The only issue with this is that we're not going to be able to set up a breeding program for the endangered species right away, as all 3 members of the group are female.
You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?
No, I'm simply saying that life, finds a way.
That'll be a later problem though, as the plans for Otter Grotto have officially been approved. Plans also include the construction of our very first restaurant at Keystone Wilds, which is going to tie into the habitat in a creative and stunning way for members of Club Keystone. You truly aren't going to want to miss this one. If you'd like to further support the construction of Keystone Wilds and our latest expansions, then consider becoming a member of the previously mentioned Club Keystone. The link is in the description below. Not only will you receive early access to videos, but you'll also get your name forever on the wall of donors. Thanks to all of our current members for the endless support. We truly couldn't do this without you. If you enjoyed today's video and a continuation of our newest adventures, consider subscribing. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment too. By engaging with the video in any way, you're telling YouTube to push the video to more people, and the more people that watch, the more videos I can make at a higher quality. The channel growth has been absolutely amazing lately, so let's keep this momentum going strong. With an IUCN rating of vulnerable and a wild population of around 5,000, the Asian small-clawed otter truly is going to fit in perfectly at Keystone Wilds. They're small creatures, so they don't need a whole lot of space. However, they are going to need land requirement, water requirement, and deep water, just not very much of either. This is going to make their habitat relatively complex, but I think we're up for the challenge. Asian small-clawed otters are very social animals, needing a minimum of 2 in each group. Typically they're dominated by a mating pair, which isn't going to be possible with 3 females in the enclosure, so I am curious to see what happens. They're also exceptionally intelligent animals, needing a wide variety of habitat enrichment items. Despite their outwardly cute appearance, their dietary options relay the information that they're also pack-hunting carnivores. Putting everything together, they might not be a beginner-friendly species. They do, however, have a very wide variety of interspecies enrichment, including some species that are already found at Keystone Wilds, and some that were recently discovered on the console version of the game. Today, however, we're not going to be using any. Everything that we've built at Keystone Wilds so far simply has been the entrance of the zoo. Now we're starting on our first wide-open pavilion. Otter Grotto is going to be going on the left. I've also laid out a second habitat, but that's going to be a later issue. In between the two habitats, we're going to be building Keystone Wilds' very first restaurant. Since the restaurant directly borders Otter Grotto, we're going to be building underwater viewing both in Otter Grotto as well as inside the restaurant. It'll make sense in a second. In my opinion, building for an animal that requires deep dive is one of the most difficult things to construct in all of Planet Zoo. We've only done it once in Keystone Wilds so far, and there's a good reason for that. The pre-planning phase of a deep dive enclosure is by far and away the most important step, as if you mess up now, you're going to have to redo the entire habitat, because each individual species has its own depth requirement that you're going to have to fulfill. Personally, to start, I always like to dig a hole exactly the depth that the animal has to go. In this case, it's 2 meters. Once the foundation is at the correct depth, I then like to lay the beginnings of the path. We don't have to finish everything yet, we just have to make sure it works. For smaller deep dive enclosures, now you can start building the actual habitat. However, this one's going to be a bit larger, so we're going to need an entrance as well as an exit. Personally, when I can and the exhibit is large enough for me to do so, I always like to have one side be stairs and one side be a ramp. This way one is more efficient, but the other's more accessible. From here you should have something that looks like this, and now it's really easy to simply add a glass barrier, throw in the water, triple check that it's deep enough, because you do not want to do this again, and with a little bit of luck you should have a pretty good outline of a habitat. Since the right side of the restaurant directly borders the left side of the habitat, I think that's going to be a good starting point. First of all though, this path looks hideous. Starting some basic shaping and infrastructure for the restaurant, I want the bottommost layer that's connected to Otter Grotto's deep dive pool to feel a little bit fancier and nicer. This is simply because scattered around Keystone Wilds, I want to have some areas that are exclusive to members of Club Keystone. Real zoos and theme parks often have areas that are exclusive to pass holder members, so this is going to add that much more realism and truly make Keystone Wilds feel like a real place. As for the build itself, I laid a backdrop of brighter plaster than we typically use, and covered it in an interesting texture of darker wood. Using only 3 different types of pieces from the construction menu, you really can make an interesting texture. There's a lot more going on than typical buildings at Keystone Wilds. If you're unfamiliar or newer to the game, you might not know that this is actually a restaurant, and effectively what happens is that guests will enter it here, and then teleport through this random black void. It doesn't make much sense, but roll with it. After walking through the void, guests will automatically spawn at restaurant tables or booths found in the facilities menu. If you're curious as to why we never placed a path underneath the wood floor, this is exactly why, because they don't technically have to walk here. Funny enough, this little loophole is precisely what inspired the entire habitat, because we didn't have to deal with the path restrictions against the glass. We've already made great progress on the restaurant, and typically now I'd segue over to the habitat, but I'd like to keep the momentum going here. I have a nice idea of where I want to take it. I made a second staircase and connected the backside of the restaurant to the lower level of Club Keystone. Again, other than the entrance that guests can actually use, all of this is just for show. There's no path underneath the wood. I mainly made the thinner entrance so all guests dining at the restaurant are going to get a view of the otters. However, the Club Keystone members' view is going to be premium. The rest of the interior detail was surprisingly simple. All we did was expand the floor, bring over the custom wall to the left side of the restaurant, make it all 1 story taller, and finally add in plenty of seating options for all guests. I also went ahead and added in a small restroom, and unlike the rest of the restaurant, there actually is a path leading up to this, so any guest can use it. Since the large plaza we're constructing is likely going to lead to 2 different branching sections, which we'll reveal in the coming episodes, this is realistically going to be the last opportunity we have to use the classic Keystone Wilds green, so we're going to be making about half the restaurant colored this way. The rest of the exterior is going to be identical to the detail palette that we used on the entrance of Keystone Wilds. I like the idea of making some of our more important buildings visually connect and use the exact same detail and color scheme. The hard part is finding ways to make it stand out among the similarities. Starting off with this angled overhang made of wood, I think we're doing a good job. After slightly changing up the shaping in the front, I really do like where this is going. Now we just have to add a majority of the details, and luckily we have a Hot Dog Squad quick service restaurant right here that we can borrow from. One of the most important details, and one that's often overlooked, are the trims that separate the concrete roof from the plaster walls. Whenever you have 2 colors or textures that are radically different, adding in something like this to blend the 2 together can really go miles in your builds. Shifting our attention to the bottom third of the walls, we can come over and borrow the exact same faux rock formation that we've been using on every building in Keystone Wilds. The trick is to make it not look repetitive, and the way you do this is simply by rotating the angles. This building style only works if it looks randomized, so you can't simply just copy and paste everything over. Underneath the trim, I always like to add these little windows, especially in a restaurant where natural lighting is pretty important. Who wants to eat in the dark? In real life, this would make our utility bills out of control, but I think it looks a little bit better if the door's open. I also noticed that the sun was beating down heavily on the Club Keystone seating, so I added a little bit of shade. With that, allow me to formally introduce you to the Oasis, our first restaurant. I'm quite happy with how it turned out, but let me know what you think in the comments below. It's going to look even better with time once more foliage gets planted around it. My favorite detail by far has to be the exclusive Club Keystone seating though. It's such a creative idea, and the view's going to be insane once the otters get in there. Speaking of that, this enclosure is certainly going to have a lot going on in it, so I think the easiest way to break everything down is going to be starting with the underwater viewing. Whenever I'm in a jam and can't really build what I have pictured in my head, I always start with the foundation. Quite simply is because it makes the overall process a lot more manageable, because it's easier to build in small chunks than it is to build in the big picture. Realistically, a lot of the foundation is going to be covered up by the end of the build process, and if you're worried about lag, a trick you can do is make it all in the same group and then delete it afterwards, since it won't be seen. Originally, I wanted to have a lot of circular viewing ports as interesting ways to see the Asian small-clawed otters swim. Once that didn't work out, I tried the exact same texture we designed for the Oasis, however I didn't really like how this looked either. I then decided on making a relatively sizable faux rock cave. This turned out to be an absolutely perfect idea because the faux rock cave is the exact right size we needed. The size is accomplishing two things. One, when you're in here, it's large enough to be fully immersed in the otter's underwater world. And two, from the outside, it's small enough to where it's not invading sightlines of other builds. The reason I went with the relatively grounded color of the faux rocks is because I planned on using tropical rocks as an accent color from the very start. I like the mix of these two hues together. The tropical rocks also have a variant that's flat enough to not necessarily impede the traversable area of the guests, but it's also not going to get in the deep water requirement either, because remember, that's very important. The otters are going to need some space. Now that the final dimensions of the deep dive pool were finally set in stone, get it? We were actually able to significantly downsize the size of the pool. This is going to be good for guest engagement because they're going to be able to see the otters more frequently. The guests aren't the only mammals we have to treat right though, and with this newly allotted space, we can now build a big backstage for the otter trio. The last major step of the underwater viewing is finalizing the roof, because I want it all to be enclosed. I started off with a fine layer of tropical rocks on top, and then added in some mulch that we can place foliage on top of later. It's obviously rather undetailed so far, but the shaping turned out really nice, and I'm quite happy with the direction this habitat's going. It especially looks nice from the outside, as it's going to be key in making this pavilion pop. I added plenty of mulch for foliage. Let's do some. The area that makes the most sense to start with is this peninsula, as it's the defining feature of the outdoor portion. There's also an underwater tunnel that goes straight through it, and if an otter were to pass through, it would pop out right on the other side, straight in front of the window of the members of Club Keystone. This means the peninsula is going to need a rock foundation to not only look nice, but also blend into the tunnel. Since faux rocks have a decently large hitbox and the otters have a decently small hitbox, this is also going to accomplish another feat. Since the faux rocks can impede on the depth of the water, we can use this to our advantage and manipulate certain areas that the otters are going to be able to deep dive in certain areas that they'll have to stick to the shallows. Once the foundation was done, I gave it a more tropical makeover with some sand. These foxtail palm trees are quickly becoming one of my absolute favorite plants to use in Keystone Wilds, and this is a perfect example of why I like them. The one tree appears as two when you sink it beneath the ground, and it perfectly splits the peninsula in half. To make the peninsula's texture really come to life and help blend everything together, I added a lot of buffalo grass but sunk in really deep into the ground. Otters are short animals. If the buffalo grass came up any more, it would be tough to see them. Typically, I'd wait a little bit longer into the build process to place my enrichment items, but I figured this would be an absolutely perfect place for a bubble machine. Placing these smaller faux rocks inside of the larger ones is almost as important as placing buffalo grass on blank texture. It really helps make it more dynamic and interesting looking. Underwater detailing is actually one of the easiest portions of foliage in the entire game, as there's only a handful of plants that can actually survive underwater. In the pool of the Asian small-clawed otter, there's two types of plants, ones that go on the rocks, and everything else. Underwater eelgrass is an especially useful plant. It takes up a lot of space and looks really nice on the bottom of any body of water. Now that we have the underwater viewing and the restaurant in place, I think it's finally time we start working on the staff room. This is going to cover the entire left side of the habitat and be the final border keeping the Asian small-clawed otters in. It's also going to be one of the more detailed portions of the entire habitat, and I'm excited to start. Building a detailed backstage is one of the big learning curves in this game in my opinion, because a lot of new players typically will neglect this phase of the build process. It's totally understandable too. Backstages typically aren't as interesting and don't have as much going on as the actual habitats themselves, but they're vital to a zoo's operation. To truly improve at something, you always have to take a step outside of your comfort zone, so if you've never tried to build a backstage like this before, I highly encourage it. It's really rewarding. They're also rather easy to put together. Typically only one side of them has to be beefed up with details, because that's the side that actually intersects with the habitat, and you don't want to break the guest's immersion by making it obvious that this is a backstage. You have to try and hide it. Just like the Oasis, this building went together rather quickly, mainly because we already had the main detail palette already filled out from a previous episode. All of our backstages look uniform and consistent. Another detail I've grown really fond of as of late are using the conservation pack air duct pieces and making a convincing air conditioning system that runs throughout the backstage. Just because these behind the scenes buildings are supposed to look a little bit basic doesn't mean it has to look boring, so we're going to be adding a trim very similar to what we used in the Oasis. This is also where I always will add my gutter system. Building realistic details like this truly is the best. So far so good. The basic facade is entirely done, but now we can add some more advanced details. We're probably going to leave the backside alone for now because, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what's going to go back here. That's a later issue. We haven't done any interior work today, and if we can get it to look even half as detailed as the inside of the pre-built keeper hut, we're doing something right. One of the other major functions of the backstage is keeping the animals contained when you want to clean the habitat or contain them for relatively any reason. In order to do this, I tried my luck at making a pulley system that can either open or close at will. Obviously it doesn't work, it's just for show. Backstage detailing is also the sole reason why I personally believe the Conservation Pack is a top 3 DLC. By far the most important thing to remember whenever building any form of backstage is that it doesn't have to be perfect. What I mean by this is that this is a space that guests will never see. Zookeepers use this and animals use it too, so it's gonna get dirty. The more scratches and wear and tear that you add, the more realistic that it feels. This is a space that's meant to be used, so it's gonna take some damage. I really like the shaping on the back of the building, even though I'm still not sure what to put back here. The main tree, however, is on the inside. I used a fair amount of blueprint items in here, but this is still by far the most detailed backstage in any of the Keystone zoos. The best part is, including the pre-built keeper hut, it has 3 separate rooms. Now that absolutely all of the infrastructure is finally complete, I say it's about time we finish this habitat once and for all. Remember, whenever working with foliage in bulk, always remember to have random rotation on. The most important thing to do right now with the foliage is to cover up the backstage because it's pretty obvious and you can see it from far away. Luckily, by using some temperate trees and creosote bushes, we can hide the backstage and detail the underwater viewing at the same time. Creosote bushes in general are by far one of the most useful foliage pieces in the entire game. They're so good at blending everything together. You just have to make sure that they're not bursting through any walls, because they can get a bit big. They're also another one of those plants that you can sink quite far into the ground and make it look like grass. They're also quite helpful in letting you hide other plants inside of them, as you can sink the trunks of trees down and make them look like additional bushes inside of creosotes. The number one foliage flaw I see among new players is that they simply don't go far enough. Go crazy! In nature, there's not only a couple of species per plant whenever you go outside, there's hundreds, if not thousands. Use common reeds to act as a different type of grass. Coastal mangroves make for excellent bushes and blend into rocks really well. Saltwort is another nice family that looks really good on faux rocks. What I'm trying to say is that 99% of the time, the more species of plants that you use, by definition, the more realistic it's going to look. I wasn't able to get the foliage thick enough in the backstage to where it looked good, but it also wasn't bursting through the wall, so I used some additional ivy plants to help blend everything together and make it look a little bit more green. If you have a wall that looks just a little bit boring, ivy is by far one of the easiest and most effective ways to spice it up a little bit. I'm especially fond of how it's climbing up and starting to overtake this window. It's a bit overgrown. I also started hanging some vines off of the concrete. I'm 99% sure that the otters won't be able to get up here, but we're gonna have to double check that once they're actually in the habitat. Truly the best foliage tip I can possibly give is just use so much of it and see what sticks. If something doesn't look good, you can always delete it. By using a ton of foliage in logical and reasonable places, eventually if you use enough, it's impossible for a build to look bad. The buffalo grass in particular was a bit tedious to place in this build. Since the Asian small-clawed otters are so small and they're so short to the ground, I had to place it really far underground just so it's poking up a hair. One of the telltale signs that you're close to being done with the foliage portion is that you start going over details that you've already done previously in the build. In this case, we're going back underwater and placing more of the faux rocks to blend everything together one final time. The habitat truly is starting to come together. We even have our custom-made sign finally put in. The sightlines on the back, though, are looking a little bit bare. There's obviously nothing back there, but we don't want the guests to know that, so we're going to have to build up another layer of foliage. To start, I decided to use upside-down stalactite pieces from the Twilight Pack. These look really good as natural rock walls. I tried my best to blend them into the back of the concrete, making it visible in some areas and not visible in others. After the rock retaining wall was in place, I simply added some mulch behind it. After that, the rest was simple. This is without a doubt some of our best work yet. I'm really happy with everything above the surface, but that's only half the habitat. The underwater viewing is nicely shaped and all of the infrastructure is finally in place, but it's certainly lacking in detail, and that's something we can change right now. One of my favorite things I added was actually this piece off the workshop. I really like how I was able to layer it under some of the moss decals recolored for some grunge. After the educational signs were put up, a majority of the details were actually necessities, including a trash can, as well as this habitat camera I set up underwater. This might actually be my favorite section of all of Keystone Wilds now. I'm really proud of how it turned out. Of course, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'm always curious to hear your feedback. For now though, the only thing I hear are 3 Asian small-clawed otters on their way to the habitat right now. Thankfully, it took almost no time at all for all 3 of the Asian small-clawed otters to venture out of the backstage and jump into the pool for the first time. All 3 of their behavior at first was a bit bizarre, as they showed solitary tendencies more often than not. This can be chalked up to a variety of reasons. The stress of being in a new area, a brand new diet, we truly don't know. They just have to take time and adjust to their new home, and we'll watch them accordingly. They're clearly very curious animals, as they quickly explored every single inch of their enclosure. Eventually, after a few hours, they came to the conclusion that it was more fun to explore with a friend. When exploring together, they tend to be a lot more vocal. Those chirps that you're hearing is them attempting to communicate. Their curiosity truly knows no bounds. Their absolute favorite toy to play with in their entire enclosure was easily their bubble machine. These 3 are certainly going to be a hit with the guests as soon as Keystone Wilds opens up. They're surprisingly athletic animals and always putting on quite the show. The views that you get in this habitat are absolutely spectacular. I think we did a stand-up job. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. For now, guests at home are going to have to be content with the habitat webcam of the Asian small-clawed otters for the time being. Keystone Wilds still isn't set to open to the public for a couple of months. Seeing as that we did successfully complete the Asian small-clawed otters habitat, we can reward ourselves with the sticker. Sometimes sandbox mode can get a bit easy, so I like implementing these progression systems on myself. It makes it even more fun that now I can physically own them, and you can too. Our new head keeper got used to working with the trio of Asian small-clawed otters very quickly. He had a major hand in helping raise our giant otters in Keystone Park, so the work must be pretty similar. Overall, a very successful expansion of Keystone Wilds, and be sure to let me know what you think. If you have any name suggestions for the 3 Asian small-clawed otters, feel free to leave them in the comments as well. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, including today's episode. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Kingpin out for now though. See you next week.